Happy New Year, everyone. Make some pound cake. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm showing you a recipe that will hopefully brighten up the long days of winter that we're entering. Holidays are over. We need a little pick-me-up, so I'm making a very simple, straightforward lemon pound cake. It's kind of zippy but comforting, not too sweet, and I'm gonna show you how to make it. So pound cake gets the name because the kind of traditional, original recipes for pound cake was like a pound of sugar, pound of butter, pound of eggs, pound of flour, something like that. And I guess the name doesn't sound so appealing because the name makes it just sound super heavy. Sorry, baby noise. Now that I've tried it myself and made it a few times, I realize the crust looks really dark, the crumb looks really tight, and so it just looks heavy and dry. But really, truly, it is such a tender, delicious, in a lot of ways, light cake. Kind of belies the name. Traditional pound cake also does not have leavener in it. It gets all of its lift and lightness from beating the butter and the sugar together. So we're going to talk about that. Mine has a little bit of leavener just as a kind of insurance policy. But really, it's a very straightforward butter cake with like high proportions of sugar and eggs. So I'm going to make a lemon version. If you like a traditional plain pound cake, you can leave out the lemon and just do it like a vanilla flavor. That's great. I'm gonna make it in a loaf pan. So if you wanna make this as a larger cake to serve more people, you can double the recipe and bake it in a bundt pan or in a 2-pan. So it's like very versatile, very easy, really truly like pantry ingredients. Ingredients, of course, we're starting with butter, all-purpose flour, 3 large eggs, some sour cream, granulated sugar. I have very small amounts each of baking powder and soda. If you want like the full, obviously, quantities and everything, go to the description below. Some kosher salt and some milk. So my recipe uses a little bit of liquid ingredients. I'll talk about that. I have a lemon. I'm going to use the zest. And then for the glaze, which I'm going to do a lemon glaze, I have confectioner sugar and a little butter. And I'm going to use the juice. Special equipment. You definitely want to use a stand mixer. You could do this with a hand mixer, but you are going to be beating the butter and sugar together for a very long time. So the stand mixer with the paddle is really helpful for that. I have a standard size loaf pan behind me, and that's really it as far as special equipment. It's like a really easy cake. It just requires a little patience for beating the butter and sugar, and that's it. So I have my oven already on 350. That's what we're gonna bake this on. And I have my loaf pan. You could do, this isn't 4.5 by 8.5, which is what in my mind a standard size loaf pan is, but often you see 9 by 5. It works perfectly fine in either size. It's just a little bit taller in this pan. This is like just the butter wrapper. So I just use the butter residue on here to grease my loaf pan. And I'm not really concerned about making it nonstick. I just want a thin coating so that my parchment sticks to the pan and doesn't have any air bubbles. So I have a piece of parchment that I cut to just the exact length of the loaf pan, and then I just smooth it along the bottom into the corners and then up the sides. So I'm gonna now mix my dry ingredients. It's particularly important in pound cake. It's important in basically all butter cakes that the ingredients are room temperature, but said another way, it's really important that all of your ingredients are the same temperature. That's really crucial in putting together the batter. What you want in the batter is this like thick but super light, really well emulsified batter. You need that emulsion to get that like perfectly tender, even crumb. So that means that you have to have them all be the same temperature. If you're like spending all this time to cream together butter and sugar and you're getting it super light and then you're adding cold eggs to that, the cold eggs is gonna harden the butter and then you're gonna have, it's just not gonna create this smooth emulsion. So I'm gonna mix into my all-purpose flour, some kosher salt. I contemplated using cake flour, but when I tested it, it's still so tender using all-purpose, and the cake has so much fat and eggs and like liquid from the eggs that like it actually needs a little extra structure from all-purpose flour versus cake. And then I have a little bit of chemical leavener. Again, this is not really what you see in like traditional pound cake recipes. The only leavener is like, what is the term? Like physical, what is the term? Chemical leavener or?
Mechanical.
Mechanical, thank you. Mechanical leavening, which is air that's worked into the butter and sugar mixture. But here I'm adding, as kind of an insurance policy, a tiny bit of baking soda and baking powder. 1/8 of a teaspoon soda, 1/4 teaspoon powder. You don't really have to add it, but I think it helps because what ends up happening is you have this kind of like a large amount of batter in this deeper pan. If I was doing this as like a cake layer, I probably wouldn't add it. But that helps. Just what happens is like you need everything to bake up evenly, and sometimes what you get with like a really buttery batter is that like squidgy layer at the bottom where it didn't fully, like the weight of the cake was kind of pressing down and it didn't fully kind of like rise and spring up. And so this just helps to prevent that, I think. And then I'm gonna mix my wet ingredients. I'm using a mixture of equal parts, 1/4 cup sour cream, 1/4 cup milk. Often you see one or the other. I kind of like using both. I think they kind of do different things. So the milk is giving moisture. I mean, they're both giving moisture, but the sour cream in particular is giving tenderness. So I'm just gonna mix that together. I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Just like your eggs, you want these ingredients to be room temp. Now I'm going to grate a tablespoon of lemon zest. I'm using the fine end of this rasp grater. And as always, you want the yellow part, not the white part. And I want about a tablespoon. So this is a lemon pound cake, like I said. If you want to make a plain pound cake because you plan on serving it with some other flavor, or you just don't want to do a lemon dessert, leave the zest out and you'll just have like a vanilla pound cake. You could add an extra teaspoon of vanilla extract if you want to emphasize that flavor, or even like seeds from a vanilla bean. I tried in the past to add lemon flavor to a cake in the form of juice. Why you don't typically see that is because it tends to really mess, I mean, obviously it's like a really acidic ingredient. It increases the acidity of the batter. That can mess with the structure of your cake. But another reason why I don't do it is because you don't actually get a lot of the flavor from juice after it bakes. I find that with citrus, unless it's orange actually does contribute flavor, but like lemon juice and grapefruit juice and to some extent lime juice, like a lot of the flavor kind of disappears during baking. So you're much better off adding flavor through zest when it comes to cake. And one of the reasons why zest is so effective at adding lemon flavor is because it has all the essential oils in it. What I do to emphasize that is I like to massage the zest into the sugar. I'll save this now for the glaze later on. Just work it with your fingertips. We just want to massage the zest into the sugar, and what happens is those sugar crystals have sharp edges, and the edges cut into the zest and it starts to release the oil. So as soon as you do this, you'll notice that it starts to smell like very lemony and fragrant. So work that in until the mixture kind of starts to look like wet sand and you don't have any more clumps of zest. So now that's all the prep that we need to do. We're gonna start to put together the batter. So I have 12 tablespoons of butter, cool room temp, in my stand mixer. I am going to add the sugar to my stand mixer. If your butter starts to look shiny, like it's been sitting out and has a sheen to it, that's a sign it's really getting too warm. It's still okay, it just doesn't as effectively incorporate air. So I'm gonna turn this on. The process of properly creaming together butter and sugar to the extent that you really need for a pound cake takes a long time, like 8 to 10 minutes, depending on the speed of your mixer. So this is why it's much easier in a stand mixer, because you don't have to sit there like holding the hand mixer, which is just like always ends up kind of hurting my wrist after a while. So I'm gonna get this mixing. I have it on medium-low right now, just until the sugar is incorporated into the butter and everything's combined. I'm gonna lock the head. And I have a flexible spatula here because we wanna scrape down the bowl a lot. You'll notice that like what's in the center of the bowl gets really light in color and fluffy, and then what's around the edges looks darker because that hasn't been whipped as much. So we're gonna scrape it down. I'm gonna let it go on medium-high, and I'll come back every couple minutes and give it a scrape. And we're gonna go from this mixture, I'll show you, which is dense, firm, and yellow. We're gonna go to a mixture that has increased in volume like several times, probably like at least 4 times in volume. And it's gonna be very pale, almost white, and incredibly fluffy and light. And like when I lift up the same size dollop on my spatula, it's gonna weigh almost nothing because it's gonna be a lot of air. So that's gonna take a long time. I'm gonna put it on medium-high and come down every couple minutes and scrape down the bowl, and then we'll see what it looks like when it's properly creamed together. I think that was like a good 10 minutes of medium-high. And here we have this incredibly fluffy, it's super pale, it's almost kind of white. It's like lost that yellow color. In terms of the weight on the spatula, it's so much lighter. So this is super, super airy. So now we're going to move on to emulsifying in our eggs. So I'm gonna crack them one at a time. And I'm gonna add them while the mixer is running on medium. So there's 3 large eggs in here. It's a really high proportion of eggs. It's probably why pound cake is so delicious. So as soon as one is incorporated, you can add the next. And this is where that equal temperature is really important, because they have to be the same temperature in order to emulsify together. So if you're making pound cake, you could really like leave out your ingredients overnight and then come in the morning and start. But if not that, then at least wait several hours before you put everything together. So I actually like to whip at this stage also to make sure everything is extremely well combined, and the mixture will continue to whip because the eggs are capable of holding air just like the butter. So I'm gonna let this go for about a minute or so. So now I'm gonna turn the mixer down to low, and I'm gonna add my dry ingredients and my wet ingredients. I was doing this last night and it was like, at this point, I love making butter cakes because I've made so many. It's kind of like a meditative process now. It's just something I've done so many times. Like my brain I have like the muscle memory to it. And I love this part, which is adding the dry and the wet alternating, but starting and ending with dry. So I'm gonna do 3 additions of my flour mixture. So about a third. And then right when I see that start to disappear, I add half of my liquid. Sometimes you see pound cakes that don't even really have added liquid, like all the liquid really comes from the eggs. So now half of the remaining, or another third of the total. And so it's a relatively small amount of liquid compared to other styles of butter cake. So I'm gonna add the rest of that milk, sour cream, vanilla mixture. Okay, and now the remaining flour. All right, so once you've incorporated all the flour at the end, stop the mixer. Because there's so much butter in the cake and so many eggs, it is a really tender cake. Like the more fat that's in a cake recipe, the more is a tenderizing ingredient, the more tender it gets. And so really compared to the amount of eggs and butter, there's not a ton of flour. Like the proportion of flour is relatively low, and that is also keeping it tender. And it also means that the cake itself doesn't have a ton of like oven spring or rise. So I want to make sure that all of the flour is really well incorporated and even. So I'm going to scrape down the paddle. I always like to finish mixing a cake by hand to make sure that it's well mixed, because if you let the mixer go and then you realize that there's like little bits of flour or butter that aren't incorporated, and then you're mixing more, you can risk over mixing. All right, so I do have some unincorporated flour around the sides, and I want to just scrape the bottom really, really well because there's some unincorporated butter mixture. So I just want everything to be very, very evenly mixed. And the batter is really thick, but also really light. When I hold it up, it's very well emulsified, and by that I mean it's not broken. The fat and the liquid have combined, and it's smooth, and this is gonna give us a really nicely textured cake. So this goes into the prepared pan. Everything in my pan, and now you can use a spatula, but I just have my little offset here. I'm gonna smooth this into the pan, get it into all the corners. Now the cake, it rises nicely, but it doesn't get that big dome with like a big dramatic crack down the center, so just keep that in mind. My oven is preheated to 350, and I have a rack in the center, and it's gonna bake for the better part of an hour, but definitely go with the indicator rather than the time. It's like 50 to 60 minutes, but you want it to be really dark golden brown, and a cake tester is going to come out clean, and it's going to be springy in the center. So about an hour. So I let the pound cake bake for 58 minutes. Could have gone probably like 3 minutes longer because see, it sunk ever so slightly in the center. So it's probably like a tiny bit underbaked. But it does not dome dramatically. It stays pretty flat actually. It's still warm. And now what I want to do is make my glaze. So I have, this is 3/4 of a cup of confectioner's sugar. A lot of times with a lemon drizzle cake, you see granulated sugar in the glaze. You can use either. I'm gonna add to this, I have a tablespoon of butter. I always like to add whatever the fat ingredient is in the cake. I like to add a little bit of it to the glaze. It helps to thicken it. I also added a pinch of salt. I'm adding to that like a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then I have the lemon that I zested, and I need a 1/4 cup of fresh juice. If it's a decent sized lemon that's decently juicy, you should get about that. So it makes a relatively thin glaze. And I have a skewer here because we're gonna poke some holes to help that glaze absorb throughout the cake. So we're gonna add the 1/4 cup of juice. So whisk until everything is smooth. You can see it's a pretty thin glaze. This is not the kind of glaze that you're gonna pour over top and it's gonna make like a white thick layer. We want this to soak into the cake. I'm leaving it in the loaf pan. And I'm using a skewer rather than like a cake tester because it's making bigger holes. One thing I do like about pound cake is how, because of the sugar content, the top does get like crunchy, crackly. So now I'm gonna pour my glaze over. I'm also gonna run my little offset spatula down the sides where I don't have the parchment, just to help loosen everything. As the cake kind of pulls the syrup into the crumb, I'm gonna add just that last bit of glaze. And now I wanna let this sit until it's fully cooled and the glaze has a chance to set, and then we will take it out and taste it. Another 45 minutes or so, 40 minutes. It can be a little warm. What you want for the glaze is a chance for it to set so it hardens a little bit, and then it makes this like really great kind of crackly crust on the outside. So we're gonna have lunch and then we'll come back and unmold it, slice it, and taste it. The cake is like tiniest bit of warmth on the bottom, but let's cut it and see. I'm gonna lift it out with the parchment. So I'm gonna slide the parchment out from under. It's a really tender cake, so it's like, I don't wanna handle it too much because it could fall apart. So I'm gonna cut it. So it has the really characteristic kind of like classic crumb of a pound cake, which is a very, very tight crumb. And I think there's a lot that you just don't get from looking at it, which is just like how incredibly tender it is. And what I like is you see like the lines of where the glaze soaked through. Literally like they're like the lines from the skewer. And then I like how on the top becomes even more crackly from the sugar and the glaze. It really is kind of like the perfect snacking cake. It's not too sweet. It's lemony. It's kind of like any time of the day. Such a tender crumb. It eats so much lighter than you think it's going to based on how it looks and like all the ingredients that are in it. Kind of good for this time of year when like holidays are over. They're really like fun baking is over, but you also don't feel like doing a lot of baking because there's all the cookies and desserts, but you still want something sweet to have around. So this is a great option. There's a wide world of pound cake that I'm excited to explore. And this is just one version, but like I said, omit the lemon, make a vanilla version, serve it however you like. I don't know, like visually it doesn't do that much for me, but you make it, you try it. The texture is so delicious. It's kind of one of my new favorite things to make. So I want to say thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and Happy New Year.